Yeah. Okay, so mandrakes stand out, both in Harry Potter and in this. Anything else stand out to you?
Well, they were happy to share their slaves to have children. That's,
Yes.
I guess that was the custom.
Yeah, more than one wife, and they all deceived each other all the time. My goodness.
And it says like placing the baby or giving birth on the knees. It wasn't the slave's child. It was the mistress. It was her kid.
Well, then one sign of wealth, how many kids you have, because they can support you when you get older, and then you work the farms, and basically slave labor in the family.
Yeah.
Now, Jacob and Rachel were cousins, right?
They were cousins. We have 3 or 4 slides just on cousin marriage.
Okay.
Just for you.
Is that what you used to say?
Could be.
Oh,
I wanted to ask, is anyone here married to your cousin, first or second cousin?
No.
Do you know anyone in your family? I have someone in my
I bet
family.
they would tell.
You have above you or?
Above.
Okay.
Back in Claiborne County.
That sounds about right.
I do ancestry. It's my hobby.
Okay, we're gonna talk about cousin marriage, and I'll ask you to be not as judgmental against it with the stigma. The U.S. has a big stigma on cousin marriage that's not shared throughout the world. It's encouraged in some societies still today.
Well, back several generations, people, they didn't have any choice. There weren't many people when they were selling the country.
Well, and it's not just you didn't have a choice. It's the preference. We'll wait to get to that. Any other parts stand out? Susan's going to have to leave early, so I asked her if anything at the end that stands out.
This may seem trivial, but how do you sleep on a rock?
Oh, hey, I read too long of a commentary about how the Hebrew could be that he laid beside the rock out of being protective and not on the rock, and it's a mistranslation. And I sat there and thought about it, and I thought about mentioning it, and I was like, no, because I think I'd rather have my head propped up on something than nothing. But
I've done that before.
Yeah.
In the mountains where it's windy, you go right next to a rock to protect you from that wind all night.
Well, I've leaned against, because what about leaning against a rock? If you're out hiking or something, you don't want to just lay flat on the ground.
Didn't the Egyptians have something sort of shaped like this?
Yeah.
That they.
I don't know.
And it wasn't a pillow either. It was
Right, yeah.
That was a rock, or
Yeah.
this is new to me. I don't know this.
But even still.
Weird pillow.
Who's the man who wrestled with Jacob and threw his hip
Ooh,
joint?
yes. So this is one of my. This is in my top 5 in all of the Bible, and I think I could put it in the top 3.
What did she say?
Who is the guy that wrestles Jacob?
Oh, yeah.
It's God or someone standing in place of God.
We had always heard it was an angel, but then when we just read it, it's implied it was God.
So the clarity of that doesn't matter. It's someone representing God. It could be an angel of the Lord standing in place of the Lord. Sometimes even in the same paragraphs, and that goes back to our different authors. Some will say something is God, and you'll have a line from another source saying it's an angel of God, because they're like, well, God can't wrestle people. God doesn't have a body. But angels do, I guess. Yeah. But it's someone wrestling with God. And this story, we'll go ahead and talk about it. So this marks Israel. So this is when Jacob is named Israel, which means wrestles with God. And this is why I love this story. Because oftentimes, particularly, like I grew up Baptist, and when I would work in children's and youth ministry, for a lot of people that came from evangelical backgrounds, God is scary. And the only thing that you're ever supposed to do to God is submit. And so you're not supposed to think on your own. You just submit your brain and you accept what is being told of you. And you're not allowed to go out and do anything else. Just submit to what the pastor person tells you you're supposed to do. And that is not the way Israel understands their relationship with God. And that becomes true in the way they interact with scriptures. It's all a big wrestle. And so I love this story because it changed the way I interacted with God, which is not that I'm not scared of God. In fact, I might read something and I'd be like, I just don't get it. I think that's stupid. but I can go to God with that and wrestle with God. And that wrestling is what marks us as a people. It's what marks Israel as a people and still for us. That we are the ones who, we're not submitting or scared of God. We are wrestling with God. I think that is awesome. When we encounter God, it's not always easy. Sometimes it is scary. Sometimes it's asking, or almost all the time, it's asking a lot of us, but it's a wrestle. But when you wrestle, that's the relationship. And so I love that idea. That became a story that changed the way I interact with scriptures. And we talked about that when we began this class. And I'm going to use the same picture because I wanted to help us recall our mind, is that like for Jews, scripture is this series of circles that are all wrestling with the circles before. So it starts with the Torah, or really it starts with the Shema, that hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. It starts here. And then there's the Torah that's kind of around that. And then you have the prophets. And the prophets are wrestling with the Torah or the law and how you live that out. And then the writings are commenting on the prophets that are commenting on the Torah that are really just all about the Shema. But then it doesn't stop there, because that's the whole Old Testament. And then they have their commentaries and commentaries on those commentaries, commentaries on those commentaries on those commentaries. And in their same Bible, the rabbis are arguing with each other with different points of view. But the idea is that you join in that conversation, and at your own synagogue or your own temple, they would have their own way, their own rabbis wrestling with it. And the wrestling never stops. And hopefully that becomes true for us. Scripture is this ever-going conversation that we engage in. And it never stops, because we will keep on talking. And the next generation after us will keep on talking, keep on wrestling.
So what you're suggesting is the wrestling is not a physical wrestling, it's intellectual, emotional wrestling. But what we're looking at here
is a physical. But it's more, it's a battle of the wills. And there is more in the story, but the way that story came to be understood for Israel, I guess, is what I'm more talking about. In the part of the wrestling, Jacob meets, I'll say, an angel of the Lord, or someone who is God. They wrestle. So this is Jacob. We're going to see here, Jacob is a fierce man. There's some other things Jacob does. He's throwing rocks by himself. He's gathering up water from the well by himself. He's doing lots of he's a very strong man. Last week we looked at Jacob. He seemed kind of feeble. Oh, hey, there's only one more of these.
So somebody here?
I have
Yep, ma'am.
You don't have one?
No, here's one.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
oh, yeah.
We'll pass these down. So Jacob wrestles with
Oh, yeah.
divine being. And the end of it, they wrestle all night. And this is showing that Jacob is a fierce man. He's a dedicated man. And he demands a blessing. So Jacob knows he's fighting with something divine. And that's when the figure, God or the angel, breaks his hip. So still today, Jews don't eat the hip bones. There's a callback to this story.
Oh, now, which
Hips on the
exactly is
Of
that?
food, like of lamb. That's a part of the
Leg of
sacrifice.
lamb, they don't eat the hip.
What did you say?
What part is the hip? That when you go to the store, you don't buy a hip. Is it the loin? Is it what's it called?
Oh,
You shank, what?
I don't know. I don't know that much
Well,
about
you know which it is that's not the bone.
Well, rope roast.
the hip bone, whatever that is.
Roast with
So don't buy a
But
roll.
leg of lamb, would
Well,
that
you
be
don't need to worry
thigh
about it because you're
bone?
not Jewish.
Right.
And a good Jewish butcher will tell you.
But that is when Jacob is renamed, wrestles with God. And that's because them as a people, they've earned the right to wrestle with God in this new way, which we are invited into, which I think is really cool. Okay, any other parts stand out? I wanted to say that since you're going to leave early.
Okay, the hip consists of the following cuts of meat: shank, heel of round, and round. Which consists of inside round, outside round, and eye of round.
Is that the same as a steak, or is that just the lamb?
I just asked what is hip being called.
Oh,
Yeah, I think
That you
I
didn't
think
specify
the
that.
beef and lamb,
it would be the same. Okay.
yeah.
The sirloin steak comes from the hip of the animal.
And
Good thing we're not Jewish.
Okay, Any other parts that stand out before we start to move our way in?
Oh, I had another question.
Yeah.
And I forgot who now would do. No, Jacob's wife Rachel stole
Oh,
his
yes.
household gods. What was that?
So, okay, I'll wait to get to this part till we get there. So a household idol is expensive. It's lots of gold or silver or heavy metals or something. So there's more than one thing going on. One of it, she's stealing something of wealth. The second thing, she's just kind of giving it to her father because the household god is what protects them and keeps them safe, keeps her family safe and everything. So she wants to take that with her instead of going. Part of it, she's maybe not fully dedicating herself to Jacob. She's keeping the religion of her father, where she should have taken Jacob's religion. So there's a mixture of things, but it has to do with selfishness.
She lied too.
Yeah.
Can't do that with her.
And
And him.
there it is also. We'll go ahead and say this. So the part where she's having her period on it is like making fun of the idol. So like our God can do all of these things, and your God is getting period blood on it. It's making fun of idols and like tribal religion as well. It's a very comical story. In that sense, it's like silly. Like she goes through all this effort, and he's freaking out, and it's over here getting bled on. So it's like ha ha ha, like your God's stupid kind of thing. Yeah. Alrighty. Oh, before I do this, I just want to make one note. If you have last week's colors, you will have noticed that there were more colors last week. And I got rid of those colors. And so the only ones now, where we used to be looking at some of the different versions of the green, like we would specify this one is Yahwist or this one is Elohist. Now it's just green, and we're going to call it non-priestly. That's because I got too tired of bolding different ones, and in this one it was line after line after line,
Yes.
and it's getting less important. Just know, as Genesis turns into Exodus, most of the stuff is going to be Elohist. But those aren't really important. The main parts is it priestly or non-priestly? Most of this is going to be non-priestly. And we talked about that before, but if you don't remember, non-priestly is the older source. Priestly is one of the latest sources that kind of get written. And the Bible will go back and forth in the Torah between priestly and non-priestly. It's kind of interwoven, if you will. Yeah, and that's Friedman's The Sources Revealed. I look at it every single week. So if you are more interested in looking in more detail, because like what we're looking at, he might have like 8 different versions of this. And so it's annoyingly complicated. Okay, so as we've been talking about the Jacob cycle, remember we finished the Abraham cycle. We come into the Jacob cycle. Sometimes people call this the Jacob story. I will flip back and forth, which I say, but for consistency, I wanted to say the Jacob cycle. And we looked at, just like Abraham that had this big chiasm, so does Jacob's story. So it's going to begin with struggle in childbirth. Remember, there's that struggle we looked at last week when Rebekah was having Esau and Jacob. And it's going to end next week. We're going to see with a struggle in Benjamin being born. There's fleeing. There is this place Haran, which is going to become somewhat of a special place. And then the 2 stories we're going to look at today, there is how his wives are fertile. He's going to have all these different kids and 1 daughter. And then he's going to have all these goats, and we'll talk about the goats. And the focal point in the middle, it's going to be the birth of Joseph. And so that's going to kind of carry us on to the next story. We're going to, next week, be looking at Joseph's story. And so if you want to look at what is the kind of point of Jacob's story, it's that Joseph is born. And then and you can kind of see how this jumps from patriarch to patriarch, starting with Abraham to Isaac and Jacob, and now, or later, we'll get to Joseph. And these were the kind of parts that we looked at last week, starting in Genesis 24. We looked at Isaac and Rebekah and their falling in love story. And if you remember, that servant of Abraham comes to the well, and Rebekah is the one who draws water from the well. And that is normal. The woman draws water from the well. This is part of a ritual of how you would marry someone when you are drawing water and things like that. That's going to come back this week because the story's reversed and Jacob's going to draw water, which is unusual. That part stands out. We looked at Genesis 25. Abraham gets married again, and he has a bunch of kids. And we looked at all these genealogies, and then Esau and Jacob are born. And they're not friends. And then there's that sister fib part 3. If you're looking at this, did this make its way down here? I'll show you all these ones. Jacob now goes to Abimelech. And you remember, just like Abraham had done before him, and they lie about the sister. And we talked about how Jacob is out in there with a public display of affection, and everyone sees it. And we kind of get this idea, Jacob he looked a little feeble at first, but he's actually kind of a strong man. Sorry, that's Isaac. That's Isaac here. I'm getting my people's confused. And then we ended last week with Isaac blessing Jacob. If you remember that, Jacob steals the blessing from Esau. And Isaac is more wildlike, kind of like Esau. And that's how Jacob is presented last week. What we're going to see this week is that Jacob is becoming more manly or wild. And there's instances that's going to pop up. The story ends when Jacob flees. And we also talked about that there's these covenant or themes that get repeated. So there's covenants are going to happen, lots of covenants. There's these blessings, and it's not just like, I hope you have a good day kind of blessing. It's this divine and prophetic blessing that's almost telling someone's future, and it's almost like praying to God that thing would happen, and God listens and does these blessings. There's all these parts with the sisters and lying. It's like they never learned their lessons. The barren wife. So this is a theme that's going to keep popping up over and over and over again with the barren wife. And then the younger son. And I think if there's any name or theme that's most important or motif, it's this younger son. Or the younger, not just the son. The younger is taking the place of the older. And that kind of flips the narrative upside down. Usually the older is the favored one. The older son receives most of the inheritance. The younger daughter, or the older daughter, is those who get married first. We're going to see the younger daughter being preferred here. So the narratives are being flipped. There's special naming. We're going to see that again with the 12 tribes of Israel this week. And I added this one in. We didn't have this last week, but being chased for stolen goods. This is going to happen later. Remember when Joseph is in Egypt and they put the mug and the cup of grain and they chase after them, come after Benjamin? This is kind of getting us ready for that story when they're chasing after the idol. So a lot of these motifs are repeated. And this is what we're looking at this week. It was 6 chapters. Was that too much to read? Or did it feel good to kind of read that much? Okay. There's a lot I tried to fit in our little thing. So in chapter 28, all about marriage and the dream of ladders. So we'll go into this. Oh, hey, I have these handouts. I got permission from the artist. You're already looking at those because they're passing around. I highly recommend these. These things are awesome. I mean, she goes through like the whole Torah. So she's working her way through. I mean, you could just look at this and it tells you everything that you need to know. Jacob flees. So he goes from Beersheba to the land of Haran. On this other map that I gave you, way up at the top in Paddan Aram, it's way up here on that top right. That's like up near so that's where Abraham is from. That's where Jacob is going back to. He's going back there to go get a wife. Apparently they have the best girls because everyone goes up there to get married. And so Jacob is going to go that way. He is commanded to go and get this wife. And I put here's some women at a well. This is a common marriage ritual, apparently, that the single girls are at the well and you would draw water for someone.
What about when she gave Jesus water?
there's the woman at the well later. But she goes at the unusual time of day. So I guess that has something to do with it. Well, and he is commanded to marry his cousin from Laban. And Denise, was it Sunday that you just said, what is with cousin marriage or something? I don't know.
Yeah.
I have this chart up here that has our genealogy chart. If you want to look at it after class, you can track through some of the lines. But that is the cousin. And we're going to talk about that cousin marriage part in a second. But Esau sees this, and he's like, well, that's dumb. I'm going to marry someone else too. So he marries his other cousin, a daughter of Ishmael, and it's kind of out of spite. And if you remember last week, Esau already married 2 Hittite women. And we talked about how you're not supposed to marry those in the land, and he was marrying those in the land. So there's 2 ways of looking at Esau. One of them is that he saw Jacob's command to marry a cousin, and he's like, well, I should marry a cousin too. Maybe I'll earn some respect back. So he marries a cousin, but from the wrong side of the family. Or he's just doing it out of spite. Esau can never do anything right. Anytime that we meet Esau, he's always messing up. And usually he's doing things out of anger. And that's what we're going to see here. And so yet again, we're seeing Esau, he's kind of presented as wild and disrespectful. Oh, do y'all want to talk about Esau and his wives or cousin marriage first? Which sounds more interesting?
Cousin marriage.
Cousin marriage. Okay.
That sounds
So
scandalous.
in America, we are of the countries most against cousin marriage. The U.S. ranks pretty high up there. And I think it's like 13 states or something, it's illegal to marry your first or second cousin. After that, the rules don't really apply much. But that is not the case for the rest of the world, and it's not really the case in history. So today, more than 10% of marriages are cousin marriages, meaning first or second cousin.
In the whole world or in the US?
In the whole world.
In the world.
That is according to, I got this from Wikipedia. So I followed this quote, and it goes back to this 2009 New York Times article that is quoting someone, but it doesn't name an actual study. But so I don't know how true this statistic is, but there we go. I couldn't find where this was actually sourced from besides a quote from someone who studies marriage back from 2009. So that's like 13 years ago. But there's a couple benefits to cousin marriage. Namely, when you're in a close family knit system, any outsider to your family can cause big problems. So the closer you stay within your family, the more stability. And so marrying in the family, not brother or sister, but like cousin, it keeps ties in the family. It keeps wealth in the family. It keeps stability because no one's going to go to war. It helps keep your ideals and traditions within the family. Because I don't know what God you guys worship, but I know what my family does. And it helps make sure that the wife is not going to be left out to dry, as it were, if she were to get divorced. You don't divorce it when you're still going to see each other, every year for Thanksgiving. So there's a lot of benefits to cousin marriage. And it keeps family ties close, and that's really important in the ancient world, and it's really important in a lot of cultures still today. But that began to kind of decrease. Oh, okay, I guess that's my next slide. So a lot of people think cousin marriage is gross because it has some kind of big increase in genetic disorders for kids. That's not actually true. There's only a 4%. So the general population has a 2% risk of birth defects with their kids. There's a 4% increase when you marry your first or second cousin.
So it's 6%.
4% increase from 2%, which is about the same as if you had a kid after 40. So it's not really that big of a difference. There was this whole big scare in the U.S. And it had to do with politics, as things usually do. And so I'm just going to read this part. So cousin marriage has been allowed throughout the Middle East for all of recorded history. And it's been allowed in a lot of other cultures, but in the Middle East it's important. Some anthropologists view it as the defining future of the Middle Eastern kinship system, so that their society is broken down into small family clans, And this is kind of the defining future as you keep these clans. In some cities, more than 70% of marriages were cousin marriages. That would be true in like the wealthier cities where people have more money and things like that. In the Western world, they kind of began to decline in the 19th century. Part of that was because people stopped setting up marriages and women had more freedom. And why would you marry your cousin when you could marry a guy that plays jazz? Or something else.
That's right.
And so, do you play jazz?
No. on my photograph.
So, and at one point in the Catholic Church, they actually banned these marriages within the fourth degree. So you have to go out past the third cousin. I thought I had another slide on that. So we think of cousin marriages as gross. In a lot of societies, particularly for where we're reading about, it's encouraged, it's better. This is the preference. This is what you're supposed to do. If you're more sophisticated, if you're more wealthy, you marry your cousin. And so the taboo is what Esau is doing in marrying strangers. That's taboo, because you don't know who you're mixing with. You're supposed to marry within the family. And that's going to connect, like, when we're going to see about Israel, like, don't marry the Canaanites. Only marry Israel. That's part of you don't mix with those around you. What do y'all think of that?
It's against the diversity policy that you see now.
So cousin marriages are on the rise in the U.S. And there are whole websites. This is weird. Dedicated to cousin romances.
Are you serious?
No, I'm serious. Yeah. So I found out this week.
Are they mainly from other cultures that have come to this?
No, I mean like in the U.S., like Americans are like Anglo-Americans.
Are they mainly from families that came here as the second generation now? Or?
No, I think it's just people being weird or something.
So are you talking about like second or third cousin, or do you mean first cousin?
First cousin. It's on the rise in the U.S. right now. So
Even first cousin.
yeah.
Why? I guess that's second or third. Maybe.
That the taboo is, I guess, starting to shrink away. So yeah, that's that. So we think of this as, that sounds really weird, but in this mindset, this is what's better. It helps keep the family stable. It keeps your values. It's keeping the wealth intact. All of those things. Okay, so let's go back to Esau though. Esau doesn't. And that brings up this big question. How many wives did Esau have? And I'm curious if anyone has been counting.
No.
Not enough? Well, that's a good question. We'll do a show of hands. Does Esau have 3 wives, 4 wives, 5 wives, or 6 wives? Raise your hand if you think 3. Raise your hand if you think 4. Raise your hand if you think 5. Oh, you got 2. You have 2 hands up. Raise your hand if you think 6. So no one really knows.
No.
And so, me being me, I thought it was fun to look at this. So, do y'all mind if I just take 5 minutes to be silly?
So you figured this all out?
Oh no, I just put different versions of it up.
Okay.
So you got Isaac and Ishmael, the 2 sons of Abraham, and he has 1 son, Esau. And so first Esau marries these 2 Hittite women, which is what this is. So he marries Basemath and Adah. We looked at these last week. But then this week, he goes and he marries a daughter of Ishmael, Basemath, which just so happens to be the same name as this Hittite girl. Later, next week, he marries another daughter of Ishmael that has another name. That happens to be a form of this name. And then later, he has all these other, it's really confusing to keep track. So he could have 6. If you took all the namings in different parts of the Bible, he has 6 wives. Here's another way of adding it. So you have Judith and Basemath and Melitha and Elobelamaha or something and Adah. And these are all the sons. But a simplified version is, some people say he had 3 wives. Adah, Basemath, and that name. But it's just really fun. And if you want to go down a tangent, and I always love reading through fundamentalist churches give their answers for it. Because people argue really, really hard to make sure that he only had 3 sons or 3 wives, or he had 5 wives, or 6 wives, or 4 wives. And it's really important to some people. And I spent way too much time looking that stuff up this week. But let's just know that Esau isn't doing marriage the way he's supposed to. He has multiple wives, like Isaac is going to as well.
And he's continuing it by marrying Ishmael's.
Yes. Well, and it's like maybe he did that to be good or something. But he marries these 2-ish daughters of Ishmael, as well as the 2 Hittites he had married. And then he gets married some more too, to this girl over here.
And they all live together?
So, I guess so. I mean, that's a lot of mouths to feed. I hope they have separate tents.
They must have. They have that many kids.
So here we see all about marriage. Jacob does it right, or at least he's supposed to do it right. Esau doesn't do it right. That's the point of that. Also in 28, we get this part about the dream of ladders. I talked about how this was significant last week. Well, let's look at our story. So God comes down to Jacob in a dream. And in this dream, he renews the covenant with Jacob. I keep getting our names confused. We are going through so many people. And this becomes significant because we're seeing the covenant renewed. We're seeing it go on to the next generation. But it also becomes a very important symbol throughout Israel's history, for Jews, also for Christians, with this idea of ladders in this place of Bethel. If you have your little map, you can always try to keep track of where we are. So there's Bethel. It's down in the smaller box on that map. Oh, you don't have one down here. You can have mine. Oh, y'all don't have one either.
No. How many maps are there?
I only made 4. I didn't make enough. And so there's this place, Bethel. What's interesting about this place was a really significant religious site for Canaanites for centuries. And the translation of the word that we use for ladder, some commentators would suggest a better word would be a stairway or a gate. And if you remember back in Genesis 6, where we talked about the flood narrative and then the Tower of Babel right after that, and we talked about those zergats, those towers in Babylon that were these stairways to heaven. And what was significant about those, we talked about this with the Tower of Babel, we tend to think of it was man trying to get to God. But what these places actually were, it's where God comes down to earth. And so the tower that they're building, it's not so they can go to God. They build a tower so God comes down to you. And the reason you would want God to come down to you is because if he lives in your city, he will fight for your city and keep you safe. And then remember we looked at all the beer and wine and other foods that they would then feed the gods.
So they must have not thought that God was capable of building the tower down to them.
No, it's a weird mix of things. And so this Canaanite place is almost like one of those places. It's this place that God would come down to visit the Canaanites. And so we talked about this, I think, 2 weeks ago. Sometimes what we see in these stories, it's claiming these religious sites that maybe had a local deity, and it's claiming it as part of the Yahweh, as Yahweh's God. And so that's what happens here, and it's named Bethel, which becomes the house of God. And so instead of this being a place that the Canaanite gods come down, this becomes a religious site for Yahweh. And El means God, God Almighty. Beth is house. So the house of God. And that ladder, I didn't know this before, but it could be more like a stairway or a gate. And I like that instance because when I think of a ladder, I think about me climbing it up, but Jacob never climbs up to God. God comes down to Jacob. He comes down to visit Jacob, renew the covenant with Jacob.
Well, if you are trying to promote a religion, it makes sense you kind of incorporate your religion with local religions.
Yes.
So
They
that
all
people
do,
say,
don't they? I mean, they build churches on former temples and.
Or mosque on former churches. It just keeps going.
yeah.
So, but this idea of a ladder and God visiting people it becomes a pretty big and important symbol. And it's one I think is special for us to hold on to as well. So my question for you with this is, have you ever had your own ladders? like these moments when God comes down and reaches to you. I don't think we have time that we could all go around and share those, but I'm sure many of us have stories that we felt like God has come to us. And Jacob, he recognizes that moment and he sets up a place to remember it. Have you ever heard the phrase an Ebenezer stone before?
My Ebenezer.
Yeah. Do you know what it means?
No.
Or why? So, there's a hymn, it's like, here I raise my Ebenezer. So the Ebenezer stone is, it was these stones to commemorate when God would do a big thing. It comes from a story in the Bible. And so a lot of Christians and Jews would hold on to setting up their own Ebenezer stones to remember these kind of big events when God spoke to them. When I grew up, we had a Wham box. And it was wonder, adoration, and I don't remember what the M stand for. But anytime that we felt like God had done this great thing, we would put it in the Wham box. And it was this little birdhouse that had a slit in it. And once a year, I think it was like around Thanksgiving, we would pull out our cards from the Wham box and look at them. And I remember that as a kid. Because sometimes when life is hard and sad, or maybe we feel distant from God, we can look back to those moments. So keeping them written down, kind of remembering our ladders, remembering our Ebenezers are important. This picture of a ladder, though, it comes not just to be about people's experience of God. They use it in a lot of art to represent when God is using someone else. So I'm going to pass this little icon around. This is an icon of Mary. And there's a lot of things that we call theophanies in it. A theophany is like theo, God. Theophany is like light or eye. Any time that you kind of see like a thing that represents God or the divine or something happening. And this icon of Mary, it's really cool, is she's holding a ladder. There's like a ladder by her hand. And a lot of the times you'll see icons with a small little ladder somewhere on it. And it's to represent God doing something there. This icon's cool is she is red and green, and it's because she is the flaming bush. That there's the green bush that's on fire, and there's other significance of her on a throne. But it's because God spoke through Mary by giving us Jesus. So I thought that was cool. With this idea of ladders, does this speak to any of you? Or does this just sound weird?
Well, I think it's very important to point out that it's a two-way ladder.
Yeah.
And if you look back, if you were an observer from the outside looking in, I don't mean to criticize other traditions, but you really see a pattern in other traditions where man is trying to reach up to God and trying to justify himself to God and trying to gain God's favor, whereas in our Judeo-Christian tradition, God is revealing himself to man. God's coming down to the ladder.
I think that's what's special about this story and remembering our own moments when God reaches out to us. I just looked at the clock.
I mean, do you think with the icon, the idea is that Jesus comes down?
So that's the idea with Mary. The reason Mary is painted in these theophanies is because she is the ultimate vehicle through which Jesus comes to us. And so that's why this one's special. So in chapter 29 and 30, Jacob is going to meet Laban and Laban's daughters. Jacob is going to get married. He's going to have lots of kids. And then I just put the goats.
The stripe.
And
genetic traits.
Yeah. So we'll jump through the story kind of quickly. So Jacob travels. He doesn't have a big dowry, and so that is why he has to work for those 7 years to marry the daughter. Is because Laban's like, you come to me with nothing on him, and that moment when they embrace, a lot of commentators put he came with like 10 camels and that's it. So he's looking to see if he has more gold on his robes. Like maybe he's going to hand him some other gold or something, but he doesn't. So he's like, you're going to have to work for 7 years and you can marry my daughter. He marries the wrong daughter, so he has to work another 7 years to marry Rachel.
The guy brought the dowry, not the woman?
I guess in this instance.
Yeah, okay.
if you want to marry in the family, you got to. Well, just like if you know, in David, he wants to marry Saul's daughter. Do you remember his dowry? It was the 100 foreskins of the Philistines. Which one guy against 100 Philistines, you wouldn't think he would survive, but David brought 200 just because he could. There's lots of euphemisms and funny moments we miss out. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe this is coming up next, but we're missing number 12.
The 12th son?
Oh, that's Benjamin?
Yeah, so there's different. Yeah, we'll have it up here. There's different ways you number the 12 tribes.
Okay.
One of those is because Joseph has 2 tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. Sometimes Dan isn't counted among the 12. He's just kind of forgotten about, I guess. Benjamin's not born yet, and also sometimes Levi's not counted because they didn't have an inheritance. They didn't have the land.
Oh.
So there's different ways you count the different numbers.
Okay.
I'll just say the significance when Jacob meets Laban and his daughters is that Jacob pulls stuff up from the well, and that was usually the woman would pull it up. And he also moves the stone by himself. You can kind of see it here. And one guy like throwing a stone, like you get this idea he's gotten pretty strong. He's not the guy in the tent anymore. He's learned to be kind of independent. But he has to work for all these years, and then they have all these kids. I think I have this on the next. Yeah. So there is some special significance in the names of the tribes of Israel. And I think this is really cool. So in Revelation chapter 7, it names the tribes of Israel, but it gives them in a different order. And so our next slide, we're going to look at the names of the tribes in the order given in Revelation. But we're going to use the definitions of the names given here in Genesis. And when you do that, it makes a poem about God. So there's kind of this poetic... If you can read Hebrew, like if you're reading Revelation in Greek and suddenly there's all these Hebrew words, if you have to look up the definition, it would spell out this poem. So Judah is praise the Lord. Reuben, who's the first son, he is God has looked on my affliction. Gad means good fortunes are coming, or good. It means reward or something like that. Asher is someone who is blessed. Naphtali is wrestling. Manasseh isn't named here in Genesis. This is one of the sons of Joseph that becomes a tribe. Is about forgetting sorrow. Simeon, God hears me. Remember, that's one of the other firstborns in the story. I think what's significant about Reuben and Simeon is it's the same names from the Hagar and Ishmael story. Mm-hmm. God sees and God hears. Levi means God has joined. It's kind of to hold together, to sew together. And made me think, I wonder if that's why they named the jeans Levi. Issachar is a reward. Zebulun is exalted or praised. And Zebulun's a fun, it's mixing the name it's praising God. Joseph means to add. And not mentioned yet is Benjamin, so he's not born yet, but the son of his right hand. So when you add up all of these names, in the story, all of the names have meaning. So it's like, nobody listens to me, God listens to me. Nobody sees my affliction, God sees my affliction. When you're excited, you praise. They're special names. But when you add them all up, it's praise the Lord. He has looked on my affliction, and good fortune comes. Happy and blessed am I. My wrestling has made me forget my sorrow. God hears me, has joined me, rewarded me, exalted me by adding me to the son of his right hand. So that's the list. This is in Revelation. I thought this was so cool.
Who wrote that?
So what I do on Thursday mornings after I finish my PowerPoint is I'll look up like sermons or weird YouTube videos. And I was just found a random video about the sons of Israel and their names. And this was there. And I was like, man, this is like a golden nugget here in this kind of annoying part of the YouTube video. But this is in Revelation. If you take the listing of the names and then you add the meaning of the names from here in Genesis, you get this. I think that's cool.
That's cool.
Names are significant. Was the whole point of this. So he has all of these names. When he marries Leah first, and then has a bunch of kids. Rachel is barren, so there's that theme with the barren wife. So she gives Jacob her servant, and then Leah. It seems on the way that Jacob stopped sleeping with Leah, because then she's like, "Well, you can have my servant now." It says she couldn't have kids anymore, and so then she has some more kids, and then finally Rachel has a kid eventually. But then we see this kind of multiplication. God has blessed Jacob in a weird way, even though it wasn't with his favorite wife, and with kids. And then he's going to with sheep or with goats. And it says that if you remember the story, he tricks Jacob and he puts up the Asher poles. So there's two things with that. One of them is this was kind of a pole to help the goats get excited and have more goat babies. But he also paints it black and white. And there was an ancient belief that when the mama goat was going to have her babies, the environment around them would influence what the babies looked like. So he paints them black and white so they would have black and white kids and speckled kids. So that's the significant of that.
Oh my goodness.
And it was unusual to have speckled goats, I guess because they just bred that gene out. And Jacob kind of tricks Laban by painting all of these Asher poles to have the kids that he wants. So I think it's kind of funny. But the deal he has with Laban, you wouldn't expect that Jacob would win, and somehow he does. And so that Asher pole is like a miraculous kind of intervention.
Those weren't strong.
They weren't strong?
Sheep and goats. The ones that were produced weren't as healthy, right?
I think they were healthy.
Oh.
They just had
I thought something were.
They just weren't purebred, like white.
Oh.
They were speckled.
I think the reason why they're probably worth less in that society, because if you're going to use the wool to make clothing and stuff, and if it's speckled, it'd be a lot harder.
Well, I took a note that said Jacob bred the stronger sheep with 100 rods and kept them for himself, and the feebler sheep were Laban's.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, he tricked Laban. What's interesting here is we're seeing cycles of deceit.
Yeah.
So Jacob is called the deceiver, and if you remember, he's the younger son and steals the inheritance. Laban kind of does an Uno card reverse on him, and he thinks he's going to marry the younger daughter, and he gives him the older. So it's kind of poetic justice. But then Jacob has to get back and even with him here. Any questions about that part with the goats or the sheep or anything? The idea here is God is blessing Jacob. He's multiplying Jacob. He's multiplying his wealth. He's getting all these goats and sheep. He's having all of these kids. And then he's like, wow, I think Laban might get mad at me. I need to get out of here. And so he's told by God to leave. And so as they go out, I could not find a free image of someone that looked like she was in robes on a goat. So, but I wouldn't, or on a camel. I got this picture of a camel because I just wanted you to see when people ride camels, they have all these extra blankets. It's pretty easy to hide other stuff on it. That's the whole reason I put this picture up here. And so as she goes out and takes the idol, and we talked about this, and Laban is freaking out trying to find his idol for a few reasons. One, they're expensive. A lot of your wealth is held in your idol. Also, it was a divine being that kept you safe. And so what's he going to do without his family idol? And he thinks Jacob has stolen it, but really it was Rachel. She had taken it, and she's like, well, she's on her period, and so he can't check underneath. And it's a joke on the idol. It's showing the insignificance of an idol compared to God, who is all-powerful. God's not someone that you can sit on. God is everywhere and can do all these great things.
And also, whoever stole the idol was supposed to be put to death.
Yeah, that was a high-stakes little plot there.
And so she didn't because she died, and they couldn't find it under her. So they never thought it would be her. Mm-hmm.
It's funny, it's like they always say the quiet kids are the bad kids or something in school.
Where in Revelations is that?
I think it's Revelation 7. If I
There's
remember right.
there's reference in the New Testament about the ladder kind of, and I can't remember the story, but it reminds me of the ladder.
As Jacob goes out, he's going back to the land of Canaan. And he's going to come to this town named Mahanaim or something. Its literal translation means 2 camps. Oh, I forgot. Jacob and Laban make up and they make a covenant. So Jacob is going to come back and he's going to meet Esau at this town. This town is special, and I thought this was interesting. And I wanted to I'm just going to read this little commentary. So the Transjordan town of Mahanaim is said to have been the capital of the northern kingdom during the brief reign of the person who was Saul's heir. And it's later associated with David's flight from Jerusalem during Absalom's rebellion. And it was the administrative center in the time of Solomon. I just thought that was interesting. I'd never heard of this town before. Not something that my brain saved. But we talked about this. A lot of Genesis, like Genesis was written later. A lot of the places mentioned, it's pointing forward to these books that are later in time, but were written first. So I thought that was interesting. But here, Jacob is going to encounter Esau. Oh, I forgot I was going to play you a video. Do y'all mind if I play you? It's like a 1 minute video. So I thought after we had looked at some of the euphemisms with like bleeding on the idol and the weird Asher pole and everything going on there, it might be good to play a kids video. I apologize, this is taking me a minute. Man. There we go. Okay.
Jacob and Esau meet again. Genesis chapter 29.
Esau's hairy and red.
While Jacob lived with his uncle Laban, he became a shepherd. He fell in love and got married. God blessed Jacob with many sons. Jacob also had many sheep, donkeys, and camels. One day, God told Jacob to go back to his homeland. Jacob wanted to go back, but he was afraid of his brother Esau. He thought Esau would still be angry with him. But Jacob obeyed God. He and his family packed up everything they owned. Jacob sent servants ahead to offer gifts to Esau. Much to Jacob's surprise, Esau ran to meet him, and he gave Jacob a big hug. They were so happy to see each other again.
Oh, that was it? Okay, wow, that was short.
That's cute, yeah.
It says,
So I thought it might be nice to look at a little kids version for a second, just because
I think it's cute, yeah.
There is some adult commentary that is happening through a lot of these chapters. So Jacob comes to return to Esau. Now, I want us to remember just the last time Jacob and Esau were around each other, Jacob had just stolen his inheritance, his birthright, his blessing. I mean, he took everything from the man. And remember, Isaac gives Esau the blessing that he would have to live by his sword, kind of like Ishmael, and he would be in strife, and no one's going to come and help him. And he says, I will kill him. And Jacob runs. He runs to the other side of the world, essentially. And so Jacob's coming back, and he's maybe heard that Esau has now amassed like an army of men. He was really good with the sword, and people followed him. So he has become very powerful. As Jacob comes back, he is scared, as you would think that he was. So he gives him a bribe. And so it's 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 25 camels and their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, and 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. So he's just kind of giving him, trying to buy him off and appease him. And he is still scared. So Esau comes up with 400 men. You can see in this picture here that it looks like there's an army of men coming. And so Jacob does what any good dad would do. He divides his family in half, so only half would get killed, I guess. And then he puts he puts his least favorite in the front, and he saves himself in the back with Rachel. And I read this, I'm like, this guy is not a good guy. So I think the idea here is that if Esau was mad and would come in killing, they would have to kill women and children first, and they would feel too bad by the time they get to Jacob that he might make it out of it. Not a good encounter. Thankfully, though, that doesn't happen, and they embrace one another, and they, of sorts, make peace with one another, and they go their separate ways, and it's reminiscent of Abraham and Lot going their separate ways, not mad at each other, not best friends, just going their separate ways. And Jacob names this place Succoth, which means shelter. I want to see where that is on the map, because every time I hear a town name, I want to know where it is. Thank you. This is right over the River Jordan. It's in the zoomed in part. Oh, yeah. And that, by the way, is the name where we get the Feast of the Tabernacles. That becomes a Jewish feast.
How do you get that? Out of
because a tabernacle is like a shelter tent that you carry around, and a sukkah is like a tent. It's the same Hebrew word.
Shelter.
I just thought that was cool. What we've kind of seen in Jacob's story, have a good week, Susan, is he is a man that's been known as a deceiver. We see kind of some divine irony and divine justice happen, where Jacob wronged others, he gets wronged. And that's kind of going to teach us about the kind of retributive justice of God. When I wrong others, I will be wronged. When I do good things will be rewarded to me. You could call it kind of karma if you want. We'll talk about that in. So we're learning some things from Jacob's lesson, from Jacob's story. The other thing we're learning is when you have lots of wives, and we've mentioned this every time someone has lots of wives, it always causes trouble every single time. It never works out well. And that's a way of teaching us, don't marry lots of people. It doesn't work out well in the end. Jacob is a good guy. God uses him, but he has lots of mistakes. And we've talked about that each time. If God can use Jacob and Abraham, God can use you. And here we even see God using Esau to an extent. But the biggest difference between Jacob and Esau is Jacob was willing to listen to God and walk that way of God, even though he's not perfect. And that's what kind of made him the better heir, is because he listens to God. And so the encouragement from Jacob's story...
Well, maybe Esau would have listened if he hadn't had his inheritance.
Yeah.
Well, even before then. Were you here last week with us? So we talked about when Esau sells the soup, sells his birthright for soup. Hey, are you all going?
Hey, Poppy.
I see that. You want me to take it? Okay. So when Esau sells the soup, his birthright, the birthright was to inherit the covenant that his dad had taken. And so he cared so little about this covenant, this new way of walking with God and things, that he trades it for some soup. Oh my word, this stuff is sticky. There we go. And so Esau, what we saw time and time again, wasn't worthy of it. When Jacob is told by God to do something, or he listens and does that thing, even though he messes up a lot of the way. Right in between these two stories, though, is that moment of wrestling with God. We talked about this at the beginning, but I want to talk about it again. And this, I love this little picture here. I like this picture because the divine being here, you could see as an angel, could be God, it could be whichever. That part's not as important as this idea of wrestling with God. And so Jacob, what we've come to see, is a man who's dedicated and determined. And in the story, we get the idea that he knows he is encountering the divine. And Jacob's, when he encounters the divine, he doesn't run away. He goes and wrestles with it, which I think it's a strange story when we think about it with our ears today. But that line where he stays up all night wrestling and wrestling and wrestling, you kind of get it that Jacob knows he's on the precipice. Precipice of something big is about to happen in his life. Either everything is about to work out or it's all about to go wrong. And so this moment when the divine comes, he's like, I'm not going to let my chance go to be blessed by God. It's kind of the idea here. So he wrestles all night long in his determination. He ends up with a broken hip, but he comes out of it blessed. And I think that's true for a lot of our lives as well. Sometimes when we encounter God, especially like when we start delving into Genesis or other books of the Bible a little more deeply, we, like Jacob, will end up bruised. We'll never be the same when we encounter the divine. But just like Jacob, when we do so, when we really do so with our whole selves, like Jacob, we'll be blessed, just like Jacob is. I really do like this story. It's encouraging to me of seeking God out and not being scared. We don't have to run away from God. And sometimes we might come out bruised, but we will be blessed. And at least that's been the case for me. Jacob, after this encounter, after everything, he goes to Shechem. And Shechem is one of those special places that we've talked about. Oh, that must be on the... There was something I wanted to point out of this. Yeah.
Shechem, when we were on a trip, is supposedly the oldest city.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. The oldest city in...
Israel. Northern Kingdom.
I always thought it was Jericho.
Well, that's after that. But Shechem is the oldest.
Oh, that's interesting.
According to our guide.
Yeah. I wonder if he was from Shechem. So that's cool. I didn't know that. Jacob leaves though to go to Shechem. This is kind of the summary of most of Jacob's story. I know this was a lot to read through, so thanks for reading through all of it. But Jacob's story, it's been a big arc. But what the main part, as we looked at with that chiasm, it's continuing the covenant and carrying it on to the next generation. With each piece, like I kind of think of these as like interlocking chains almost. As everything is kind of repeated when it comes together, but it's moving you on to the next point. And the next point we're going to get to is going to be Joseph, who's going to be a big deal.
Do you feel these people are real or fictitious?
Yeah, I was going to ask the same thing.
Legendary.
Oh, good one.
So
mythological.
Well, not mythological. Legendary.
Legendary. Okay.
So in Bible world, is this chart is kind of color coded. This chart, anyone in gray is mythic. That green, they're legendary. I might send a video that goes along with this. Because this will go through each person, and when we have the first historical record of a name, which is, let me see if it's on here. It's been a while since I've
watched this video, so I don't remember it.
Well, there's no like census saying, okay, there was really a Jacob.
I don't think so, no. But
Would you call this like an archetype, sort of like King Arthur? There probably was somebody who did